Hello, my name is Connor,
And I'm Jason.
and you are listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast.
Today we're going to be interacting with Psalm chapter 3. And in this particular psalm, it has a heading that's helpful. It says a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. If you're not familiar with that story, David had multiple sons by multiple wives. One of them was Absalom. And Absalom was... He had a lot of ambition, and at one point he started to undermine his father, who was kind of David, didn't rule well many times, and he'd get disconnected from the people, and so Absalom would stand at the city gates, and when people would come in to get the problem solved, he would get there first, basically, and so he started to earn the trust of people. Long story short, he leads a revolt. It drives David out of the kingdom. There's a period of war Absalom has, which is a very interesting physical detail. He has this super thick hair and ultimately gets caught in a tree. And then somebody comes and stabs him to death. So it's an ignominious death. But anyway, so this is David's response. So this is before Absalom dies. So from David's perspective, he doesn't know if he's going to be king again. From David's perspective, he doesn't know if they're going to be at war with his son. And keep in mind, David does not want to turn against his son. David orders people not to kill him, which obviously is not followed ultimately. But so David is super conflicted, and I've not even read the psalm in relationship to this description. So it's just something to kind of watch out for. It'll be interesting to see.
Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again, because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessings be on your people.
What amazes me when I read through this is the specificity of how David talks to God, the familiarity, like specifically around the break the teeth. If this wasn't in the Bible, it would never cross my mind to say, I have a problem with these people. Will you hurt them so that it affects their ability to eat food for the rest of their life? I would never even...
That's an everyday sort of thing for me.
Really? Okay, so I don't know if I need to catch up to you or rebuke you, but either way, that's very Davidic of you, I guess I could say. But it's just, he's so confident and so specific. I will lie down and sleep. How many of us, when we feel like we have an enemy out there, and honestly, I don't need 1,000 people to threaten my life. I can't even begin to imagine that dynamic. But if somebody looks at me wrong on Thursday, I'll probably still be thinking about it the next Tuesday, kind of thing. And it'll flash in my mind, and all of a sudden, I'm not sleeping because I just can't think of, what did I do wrong? What do I need to do? How dare they? This kind of thing, And so on one hand, he is so, I trust you, God, so much so that when I lie down and go to sleep, I'm going to wake. I do that because the Lord sustains me. I don't think he's talking hypothetically there. He is in the process of hiding out from Absalom. He was in security just a few days or weeks earlier. He's hiding out, and there he's saying, I go to sleep well. I sleep well. Like it's not bothering me. But then simultaneously, and probably these are connected, but his anger comes out so specifically. And I'm like, is this a model for me? Because I just want to remind us all, Psalms is not doctrine. Psalms is how real human beings interact with the sovereign God in the face of their real life, which largely includes their real emotion. They are prayers that were set to music. And so I'm not suggesting this is a model for how I act, but when I'm specifically considering a man who is after God's own heart, saying, man, when I'm angry, I talk about it to God, and I don't hold back. If I want this guy to die, I say, God, will you kill them? And God's going to be God, but I'm expressing it freely because he's my father. And he holds me close.
So what amazes me is David, as the kids would maybe say, is kind of down bad in this moment. He has in reality, here's the thing. If I have a young child and it's unfathomable to me to think one day like she's gonna slam a door in my face and going to like, think I'm the biggest idiot in the world. Like all these things are unfathomable to me, but I know it's gonna happen at some point, even if I do a perfect job of raising her, which I won't. And yet David, really with Absalom, the chickens are kind of coming home to roost. The fact that David has not been a good father, that he's kind of neglected his children and has created all this toxicity that has led to this situation. And there's so many interesting things that are happening here. This situation is almost a device of David's own making. So yeah, the how this is playing out in my head is this weird situation where it seems like David's actions directly led to this situation where he is being oppressed by people, not to take away the agency of the people that are doing the oppressing or of Absalom. But then and at the end of it, you have this situation where David's thoughts are in this really, really negative place. I'm glad he's being honest with God. I think that's what God wants. But ultimately, he still has what we would call sanctification. He still has a process to go down so that his thoughts align more with what God desires for his people. And yet there is this wisdom and this peace in how he thinks about his current situation. And so I love how so many people would look at David as this hypocrite, or as this person of like, he doesn't have like by all rights, David doesn't deserve to have peace. David's kingdom has been overthrown. His son has come against him. He has all these enemies, and it's this horrible situation, a lot of his own making. And yet, the amazingness of God and his relationship with humans is that he is not frightened by how God is not frightened of working with us, even when we put ourselves into a situation, and even in the midst of that situation, if we're thinking 75% in the wrong way. And so for me, that's amazing for David, that he has that ability to, one, he gets some things wrong here in terms of being more like God, but yet he still is still trying to hold on to the promises of who God is and what God wants for him and for his people. And also just the amazingness of God, that God is willing to work in the situation through this person when not even 50% of the things is David has done right up to this point. Most of it he's done wrong. And so yeah, that whole thing is just incredible to me when you begin to lay out the context and you begin to lay out how David is thinking about this situation. The fact that God's like, oh yeah, that there's honesty here. There's even some humility, and so I'm showing up here. It's pretty incredible to me.
So what perplexes me, even about what you said and use that word sanctification, is it's more about practice than even this text, because David didn't know Jesus. He didn't know what incarnate God, a God in flesh, would look like. Though I imagine he imagined it, But I know human imagination is always extremely limited. And that's the thing about Jesus that always impacts me, especially in our amazed and perplexed processing, is the idea of, I don't even know this guy, Jesus, because I would have predicted, like I remember hearing this as a Bible story when I was a kid, but in human interaction, I would have done this so much differently. So it'd be interesting, like if we could invite Jesus here and say, Jesus, what perplexes you about this? Because I don't know how to, let's say I'm really angry with you, Connor. You really hurt me. I feel like you stabbed me in the back, this kind of thing. I don't know how. I know how to say, God, help me forgive Connor. Help me to live with the fruit of the Spirit. I don't know how to say, but what I'd really love to happen, is this. There was a guy that I worked with at one point years ago, and he was a supervisor with me, and I really trusted him. And I asked somebody a question about a coworker that I had, a question about how stuff was run. I did not even see this as connected to my supervisor's leadership. And I asked him, I said, what about this? And we talked about it, and I was fine. Okay, good. I get a call a couple days later, like 10 at night, and the guy just, as soon as I answered, he's like, are you trying to destroy me? And I'm like, what is happening in your world? And I mean, I'd look to him not just as a supervisor, but as a brother in Christ and somebody that would help me learn. I was new. I was very humble about, I don't know what I'm doing. I really need some help. And man, he just eviscerated me. He told me he was going to go after me. He was going to go after these other supervisors I have and tell them bad about me. And I mean, it was just a mess of a mess of a mess. 6 weeks later, I heard his house got robbed and he lost a bunch of stuff. And I could not fight how happy I was about that. I mean, that's just the honest truth, And I was just so happy. And I wanted, that was my, oh, good, your teeth got knocked out. There you go. Get some justice. You know what I mean? And I wasn't even thinking vengeance is mine. I was like, vengeance is the Lord's, as I gloated over, I was like, I hope it was irreplaceable, in my deepest heart of hearts. So on one hand, I really relate to David, and I love the freedom of saying God, and I just always have to go back to this. God did not have to include this psalm. There were tons of people that wrote down their prayers in this era. It was not an uncommon thing to do. And so, because they didn't have internet, what else are they doing? They're back there writing down their prayers, But it's this dynamic of he chose these particular prayers, to model something. But in the grace of God and in the full weight of everything about my life is supposed to be defined by Jesus' sacrifice, by giving people what they don't deserve in the good, in a positive, loving way. I don't know how to fit this because I can't exist. It's hard for me to exist in both places. I can't say the absolute truth of how I'm feeling and not then just meditate on that, of how much they deserve it and this kind of thing. So finding, and I'm not even saying the perfect prayer would be blow up in anger and wish the worst thing. There we go. Wish the worst thing on somebody and then simultaneously be like, and I live at peace. Not simply because how other people would look at it as contradictory, but how my own spirit would live at it. So I don't even know what to make of it. It's perplexing for me to know how to live with this long term, and this is representative of so many prayers that David and other people pray in the Psalms that are called imprecatory, or this kind of, they're seeking smiting, they're seeking justice and are very visceral in the description of what they want to happen to the people they perceive as enemies.
So yeah, what perplexes me is both the familiarity that David seems to have with God, and also the reverence for the bigness or the holiness of God. So he'll use this language where he's talking about the Lord being a shield around him, and how like God is intimately involved with the sustaining David's life, and how like there's this picture of the Lord being right around David and intimately deep into his problems. And then there's this interesting thing, and I could be kind of reading too much into it, but then he talks about, I call to the Lord and he answers me from his holy mountain, and then you get to this later part in verse 7 where he's asking God to smite all these tens of thousands of people coming against him, to rebel, like to push away all that's coming against him. And so David, and it's amazing to me that David is so mature in this, but it's perplexing for me of how can I get there, of how he can see God so intimately and also have such reverence and such trust and the bigness and I don't want to say bigness again, but the hugeness and the otherness and the holiness of the Lord, and that to me is just so perplexing how you get there, because I vacillate on this pendulum of sometimes I tend to, in the same thing we always talk about with Jesus and being fully God and fully human, but I struggle so much where oftentimes I look at, like, I'll go to God and God feels so intimate and he feels so real and he feels like he's right next to me, and then I struggle to keep it in the same mind, in the same breath, in the same thought, but God is still massive and huge and other and I'm made in his image, but also he's holy, like I'm not holy. And so I struggle to keep these thoughts together. I very rarely have them back to back like David has. Does that make sense? I very rarely have these thoughts back to back. And so I'm perplexed. I am perplexed at sometimes the wisdom of David, this man that has repeatedly messed up and made his own bed to really lie in this horrific situation with his family, with his kingdom. And yet there is a lot of wisdom and a lot of maturity in that David doesn't, even though he didn't know Jesus, right? He didn't know the person of Jesus. He still seems to be holding together the idea of an intimate God with a holy, earth-shakingly powerful God, and that doesn't seem to be as conflicting as it is for me, and that is how David gets there and how I can get there is perplexing.
How much, and the question for you, I'm just started what you're saying. I'm like processing. I'm like, yeah. So why is that challenging? And some of it's unanswerable, but I'm curious from your perspective with the way you were introduced to God, and however you'd characterize that, how does that help your understanding of what you just described and give you maybe a foothold? Like, even if not knowing, you're like, but I think I get there if you give me enough time. Or how much does that impede your understanding? Stop your, or be like, I don't even know how to get around it. So the way you're introduced to God, how does that affect this particular challenge?
Yeah, I think for me, the way that God really became real for me was when I connected to the Father aspect and connected to the reality of Him as my protector and as my as the father that I needed, and as the father I'd always longed for, and as the father that I didn't have, because it was right around that time that my dad had left. And I think I talked about it in a previous podcast, or maybe this was last week. I don't know when this will be released, but hopefully that will line up in some sort of way. And so for me, the idea of God as the protector, as the one who wraps around me, that feels like well-worn clothing, that I feel like I slip that jacket on super easily, that like that's the place where I can really run to for safety, and I can run to and feel like, okay, yeah, I'm home. And then it's hard, and then, so this is how this affects me, is I tend to be much more successful with that. But if, say, I'm struggling to see the powerfulness and the holiness and this bigger aspect of God, this holy other aspect of God, I tend to be afraid, maybe, I guess, of the father role. I tend to be, and these are now just kind of, these are thoughts and these are feelings I've had before, and I'm just putting them down to thoughts, so it might be incoherent, it might not be. But when I approach the Father and I view Him as just, kind of just as a father, and I'm not taking into account all the other things, He feels safe, and He feels, if he feels right. But when I need His otherness, or as I come into contact with the holiness of the otherness, I feel like I struggle to, like, for me, that I so often want to withdraw. And maybe it's the authority, maybe it's, I don't know what it is, but for me, it almost causes me, if I'm not really intentional about leaning into Him as my protector and as my shield, and as my Father, then I will, when I come into contact with the otherness, I will pull away, and then be left without either of them, honestly. So that, I don't know if that answers your question totally, but
that really helps. I have a general sense that my view of God is incomplete, because at the very least, He's infinite and I'm finite. You know what I mean? So I know I'm never going to master Him, because I'd have to have the mind of God completely to understand all of God. But that hits me, and I think you used that word safe, and I think that really resonates with me. It's interesting. I've always wanted a bodyguard, a bodyguard dad, and it's because, and I go deep into this, maybe somebody listening knows my dad. I love my dad. But our relationship has developed over the last 20 years. We didn't really have much of a relationship when I was a child. My dad was very much married to the ministry, and he was great at it, still is great at it. And so, but he didn't feel comfortable in his marriage, didn't feel comfortable having kids. So I lacked, and this extends beyond, it's to my mom. I had experiences, if something bad happened, I was the butt of the joke. If something bad happened, it was probably my fault. Like I remember complaining about a teacher for a long time, and my mom would just be like, and part of this is that generation, I understand, the pendulum has swung and it's the opposite now, but my mom came in, was a homeroom mom, and this teacher actually, she's holding like a hat, and she hits me over the head, like with this hat. And my mom says nothing to her, number one, and later she says, I think you're right. She is kind of mean and never does anything about it. Like, I felt so unsafe.
Oh, man.
And realized I had to create my own safety. So here's the irony. When I accept God, and I don't know if I do, I don't know if I accept God as my bodyguard. I still think, yeah, God is there, but I'm going to be the one that has to defend myself. But I can totally, so I may be like way more limited than what you're describing, but it's like, I feel like there's too much, I can't have him be the Holy One and do the dirty work of punishing my enemy or protecting me. It's almost like that's two different things. And that's why it's really super hard for me to understand what's going on in the Old Testament when whole, cultures are being erased, what's happening there. And I can put it together a little bit cognitively, and ultimately he's the potter, I'm the clay. But yeah, it makes it, when I shift from one view, you articulate as well for me, I suddenly feel unsafe. Because if he's holy, I don't belong there. And I'm like, wait, I'm God's righteous because of Jesus. But still, when you have to make a cognitive leap, it's not natural. Yeah. So your feelings take a long time to catch up.
Well, when you think about the situation that David finds himself in, and I don't know if David has enough situation awareness to know that, like, he's probably caused a lot of his own problems. But when I cause my own problems and I find myself in the wilderness, or even I have enemies, and some are justified, some are not justified. I have these problems. Some are my fault, some are not my fault. And this gets to the whole, trying to work out, trying to achieve your salvation and trying to, make it better. I find myself like oftentimes God cannot be my protector until the toys are picked up. Like before my dad gets home, I have to make sure the house is clean. I have to make sure my bedroom is picked up. And that image is so hard to shake for me because I still feel like I carry wounds, and it's from my parents and it's from society that that God is waiting for me to figure it out. God is waiting to come through the door until I have my toys picked up, or until I have these issues sorted out, or until the mess I made, or the mess my sibling made, or whatever it may be is handled. Then God will show up. And I feel it so much more when I cause the mess. Like when I brought hell onto myself, when I caused horrific situations in my life, I feel so much more that like I need to have it all solved. I need to mop it up. I at least need to like get some paper towels on it before God comes in, and just so he sees that I've been working on it, just so he sees that like, hey, I'm treating this just as seriously. And I feel choked up about it because David, in all of his immaturity and in all of his mistakes, he has been betrayed by his son. His family is a mess. His kingdom is a mess. And David's not like, well, let me get a paper towel on this, or let me pick up my toys before I get home. David, this is just the natural position of David's heart, is to cry out to God. And I give David a lot of flack, but man, that for me, to be able to get here would be massive for me.
I'm going to take that with me, that picture of my toys not being picked up. I have parallels, but it's just such a good picture of, I was introduced to God by God gave you these instructions. Get it cleaned up, and then he'll come and visit you. He'll say, all right, good. He'll leave you for a while. You better keep it cleaned up because he could come back anytime. There's just no comfort in the thief in the night. I mean, it's just like, now Jesus is trying to make a specific point when he talks about thief of the night, but it took to me like he's going to catch you in the middle of this. So you need to be so afraid that you would never sin. But the truth is, you can't fear your way out of sin. Fear actually separates you from God, meaning you don't have any power not to sin, or to fight sin. I can't fight sin on my own, or else I wouldn't need a savior if I could. And that's the dynamic that I think is just so, part of the way we're introduced to God oftentimes, and I'm not blaming others because I at one point said, this is how I'm going to do it, in my own heart. But it's that causes these verses to be twice as hard for me to understand. And I'm not railing against the church or the people. I'm simply acknowledging, oh yeah, I'm carrying a burden that God never wanted me to have, that I have obstacles before I can really start grasping how to do this. And again, I'm not saying I need to clean up those obstacles beforehand, but I need to invite God in, acknowledging, God, I don't even know if I see you clearly 10% here on this. And that's okay, because David is modeled, you don't have to clean it up before you ask him in. Matter of fact, if you wait a minute, you're probably going to wait a year or a lifetime. So don't even wait a minute. Don't even start to push it together. Just say, here we are.
there's this picture you talked a lot about in your amazement about David's familiarity with God here. And there's this, I wonder oftentimes how much just the way our society is set up hinders us from having familiarity with one another. So like, this was my parents, and I'm sure it was to an extent your parents, and 95% of people, this is how you grew up life. You woke up, you went to school, your parents went off to work, or your dad went off to work, or vice versa, and then you got home. Then a couple hours later, your dad showed up, and then we ate dinner. And it was just this pattern that you fell into, and your view of authority, your view of a father, is isolated to the morning and the night, and then a couple days on the weekend. I get my image of what it is to be a parent, or it is to be a mom or a dad from my parents, who I usually wasn't with most of the day, and then if I'm a Jesus person, I get my idea of what it is to be a Jesus person once a week or twice a week if we go Wednesday, or if we're really good, 3 times a week, on a Sunday night. And I feel like this just tends to lead us feeling like God is the God who walks away and then comes back. The best days I ever have with my family, or I had when I was a kid, was when I got to spend the whole day, and it was this give and flow, and we're together, and we're playing, and we're eating, and we're even in separate rooms at the time, but we're just this continual flow of family and of these moments. I think there's a reason that Jesus does ministry in the way that he does, that he's with his disciples constantly. And we've had conversations before about how much of it there is friendship, how much is not, but yet Jesus, it seems to be pretty clear that Jesus is constantly with his disciples. There's not this picture of Jesus showing up once or twice a week, or even 5 times a week of a class to teach, okay, here's what it is to be a Jesus person. Here's what it is to be, here's what it is to be a loving person. Here's what it is to be a faithful person. Here's what it is to be a kind, generous person. It's this continual flow of information and relationship. And for me, I feel like the way we set up our lives is not conducive to familiarity. It's not conducive to familiarity for a lot of us with our parents, with our kids. It's not conducive to familiarity with the church. And I think this is how we have these distinct separations. I'm thinking out loud here, and I know this is like, this is not necessarily directly to what we're talking about, and I might cut some of this out, but I do think it's important. The way that humans have lived for most of life is that we worked and we lived with our family. We worked alongside our family. We had these chores. We had these things that we did with our community constantly in this flow. And I feel like one of the hardships, and there are always hardships to whatever culture, whatever era you grow up in, but I wonder for us if one of the hardships in the culture is we exist in a time and a place where our fathers and our mothers walk away from us. And over time, do we take in that idea that, okay, a father and mother walks away, and the father and mother is happy, oftentimes depending on what I've done, or how or what they're walking into, or what I've caused. When a reality is, if I walk in and there's like, and there's chocolate on the walls, and then there's, stuff on the floor, I'm not going to be mad, but I'm like, what the heck happened here? But if I was with my family and I saw the blender, somebody start the blender without a lid and go everyone and get on everybody's face, and I saw the joy that the toys had when they were taken out, or even I saw, or the learning experience of, okay, then it caused some sort of fit or some sort of crying episode for my daughter, but I saw where she learned and where my wife got to learn to be a better mom. For me, I'm not upset because it's all in the flow. I was there. I experienced all of the mess. I was in the midst of it. And yeah, some things can happen that cause me frustration, but it's a lot different than how I feel if I walk into, there's just, chocolate smoothie all over the kitchen. And so for me, I feel like we have to, you talked a lot, you asked me the question of, how we encounter God. I feel like one of the main challenges for us in our generation and who we are as people is we need to rewire our brain to not think that God is a God that walks away and then comes back. God's a God who is there continually in the flow of our life. And that's just really hard because that's not what we grew up with. That wasn't the example that most of us have gotten.
I love that. I've started to use the metaphor or whatever that imagine if you suddenly had to use your non-dominant hand for everything. You just found out the Lord said, all you right-handers are now left-handers and left-handers. It would take you a long time to reorient yourself, but you would do it. You would eventually do it, and it'd feel terrible at first, and it wouldn't. You think to yourself, "I'll never get this right," but you would do it. And I think it's that kind of effort that I'm going to have to go through to achieve what you were just describing. To really tie that back into Psalm 3 is David wasn't introduced to God the way we were. David was introduced to God as an all the time, all day God. He saw God at work when a lion came up. He saw God at work when he was just sitting out there and nobody appreciated him. Nobody even thought to call him when the most important person in the nation shows up at your house. You know what I mean? He saw God at work and all that, and that's what distinguished him from everybody else in his generation, is he saw God at work every day. God wasn't leaving. Now, there were times later, once he had some power, he forgot it, and that led to all this. But when he's at his best, he sees God at work in everything. And this is not a call for me as a parent, if I was in your shoes, to quit your job and stay home. It's a call to encourage my children to say, I'm leaving, but God is here with you. And at first that's abstract and weird and this kind of thing, but not to back off that. And I think, but first, I don't communicate that well if I don't believe it well. Like when I go to work, I'm not leaving God at home. Or when I leave the church building, I'm not leaving God. I was like, see you Wednesday or next week or next year or however I frequent it. But it's this idea, okay, God, I'm here at work. What do you got cooking here? What are you doing here? And it's retraining because I'm right-handed. I'm still right-handed. God's like, let's lean into the left. It's a different part of thinking about life, that there is nothing secular to me.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. And I think the challenge, because again, quitting your jobs and starting a whole new life, yeah, that could be in the cards for a number of people. But just in terms of how we carry this out day-to-day life, how we exist, how we be this person, not just for our children, but for our friends and for our spouses. I think the reality for most of us is we have to walk out the door and we have to walk back. What kind of message are we sending people when we do walk back through the door? Are we exhibiting the reality that God was with us, God was with them, that my happiness, my joy, my delight in my daughter, or my delight in my spouse, or the excitement that I have for my friend at who he is as a person or who they are as a person, does that depend on what they've done for me, or does it bubble up from a deeper peace and joy and happiness that God provides for me? Thank you for listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast. We so appreciate that you would choose to listen to us, that you would choose to put us in your ear holes. And man, that is just a privilege. And we just pray that it blesses you, that it does something for you. If something we said stirred something in you that you want to communicate to us, that you want to share with us, or a question that you might have, you can reach us at our website, amazedandperplexed.com. We'd love to hear from you. Grace, peace, and love.